Amnesty names a Wet'suwet'en leader as a prisoner of conscience. Workers at PEI newspapers wonder why the Labour Board isn't responding to the request to unionize. Two Radio-Canada journalists refuse to call the beach volleyball match of a convicted child rapist. Landslide in the Caribou region in BC sparks flooding fears. Reclusive Canadian billionaire dies unnoticed in Paris. And heat and wildfires wreak havoc on Spain. Good morning. It's Thursday, August 1st. I'm Nora. Here are your headlines. First, we start with news from Amanda Follett-Hosgood at the Tyee. Amnesty International has added someone from Canada to their list of 150 prisoners of conscience around the globe. Dista Heil, also known as Adam Gagnon, is a hereditary chief for the Wet'suwet'en. He's been serving a house arrest sentence for his opposition to the Coastal GasLink project. As a prisoner of conscience, Amnesty will pursue his case on his behalf with the Canadian government. Anna Piquet, America's director for Amnesty, said this, quote, "The Canadian state has unjustly criminalized and confined Chief Dista Heil for defending the land and rights of the Wet'suwet'en people. As a result, Canada joins the shameful list of countries where prisoners of conscience remain under house arrest or behind bars," unquote. Amnesty has been paying attention to the struggle at Wet'suwet'en for years. They published a report that argued that Coastal GasLink did not do enough to consult with the hereditary leadership of Wet'suwet'en, the group who is responsible for the traditional territory through which the pipeline passes. Next to Prince Edward Island, where employees of the Saltwire media empire are wondering why they have not yet heard about their Labour Board filings, which were made last October. A majority of workers at The Guardian and the Journal Pioneer filed for union representation, and the PEI Labour Board just hasn't replied. The story by CBC's Alec McIsaac and Tony Davis, both who would be journalists who are unionized with CBC, mentions that The Guardian is the only daily Saltwire newspaper that doesn't have a union. Stu Neatby said that the workers are trying to get a say in how their workplace runs, something that just became even more important as Postmedia plans to buy up Saltwire. During this process, Neatby discovered that many other unions on PEI are aware of the unreasonable delays at the Labour Board. Next to a story from Sarah Florence Benjamin with TVA. Two Radio-Canada journalists made the decision to not call the beach volleyball match at the Olympics between Holland and Chile. The reason, because one of the Dutch players has been convicted of sexually assaulting a girl. Yesterday, from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m., spectators of the game who tuned in at Radio-Canada would have heard nothing as the match played. Evelyn Odette and Gilles Lepine agreed that they were too uncomfortable to call the game because of the history of Steven Van de Velde. Back in 2014, Van de Velde made arrangements online to meet with a 12-year-old girl in England. He plied her with alcohol and raped her. He was convicted of the crime, but the Dutch Olympic team still allowed him to join for the 2024 Olympics. Odette said that it's possible they'll be forced to call one of his matches, but the pair took advantage of how many other games there were for them to work on and decided not to call this one. Next to the Caribou Region District in British Columbia, where a landslide is blocking the Chilcotin River. Cindy White from Castanet is reporting that the landslide is causing dangerous flooding and that people need to get out of the 3,481 hectares they've deemed to be in the danger zone. One man was rescued who had been injured by the landslide. The evacuation zone follows the banks of the river after the landslide, and you can see the map if you need to by looking it up at Castanet. A Chilcotin elder noted that this was the third time that the Chilcotin River had been blocked by a landslide in her lifetime. Next, a story of a Canadian billionaire that you've never heard of dying in obscurity in Paris. Rick Moran made his, quote, billions and billions, unquote, off of founding Swiss Chalet and Harvey's, but he was aggressively reclusive, so reclusive that no one seemed to notice that he had died in July 2022. Not even Danny Gallagher, his biographer. Gallagher's book about Moran came out 2 years before his death. He highlights Moran's life and death in a recent article for the National Post. Moran died at 89 after surgery. His son died in 2023 of a heart attack while he walked down a Toronto street. The original Swiss Chalet, which also happened to be my favorite one, was opened in 1954 at Bloor and Bedford Streets in Toronto. It was torn down in, I don't remember, maybe 15 years ago to make way for condos. And funny story, I talked to Preston Manning there once. Harvey's came along a couple years later. At the time, Monk thought Moran was, quote, out of his mind, unquote, opening a restaurant that only served chicken. How two guys like Moran and Monk became friends so early in their journeys towards becoming some of Canada's richest men must be a story for a different article, because that's not mentioned. But of course, Moran didn't get rich off of rotisserie chicken alone. He also co-founded Mackenzie Financial, one of Canada's biggest mutual fund companies. And like most billionaires, Moran stashed his money outside of Canada to hide it from tax, England and Malta to be specific, but he also owned property in Paris and Florida. And what became of his billions and billions? Who knows? It just evaporates into the ether of his friends and relations, because in Canada, you can gift huge amounts of money to people when you die. And finally, to international news, Spain is struggling with hundreds of wildfires. They are raging out of control, mostly in eastern Spain, but much of the country is on an extreme heat and wildfire warning. Fire in Benasso in Valencia pushed hundreds of people to evacuate. Spain is experiencing heat that is between 43 and 44 degrees Celsius. This is expected to be the peak of this heat wave. In just 2 weeks, Spain has had 3 heat waves. Those are your headlines for Thursday, August 1st. August 1st, oh my God, it is August. It's August, the summer's half over. Guys, the summer is half over, which I mean is good news if you're in a heat wave like I am and you're like, I could definitely go for some cooler weather right now, but it's bad news if you're hoping to get work done this summer, which I also am. So I guess it all evens out and I'm just like neutral about the fact that it's August 1st. Your rent is due, so don't forget to line your landlord's pockets with some money. You're listening to this podcast at sandyandnora.com on the Real News Network podcast feed and anywhere you get your podcasts. You have 2 days left before I go on vacation and you got to switch over to the new daily news feed. Please do it. I hope you can find it. I'm just remembering now that I promised to get someone on Instagram the Pocket Cast link. I will post that. I totally forgot. But do yourself a favor. Do it before September comes and you realize that you haven't gotten a Sandy and Nora episode in a long time. Don't miss out.